Next up, we are going to be talking about energy demand. We have with us Dr. Prasanna Joshi. Very good. Dr. Joshi joined ExxonMobil in 1998 as a research engineer at Exxon Research and Development Labs in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, after completing his PhD at the University of Delaware. He progressed through several technical leadership roles in process and modeling research at company locations in Plainsboro, New Jersey, and Baton Rouge, Louisiana, before assuming the role of section head of process modeling, ExxonMobil Research and Engineering Company in Clinton, New Jersey in 2007. Dr. Joshi received his MBA and with a major in finance from Tulane University in 2006. Dr. Joshi, and I assume the lights are going back on? Very good, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you, Ray. And again, I want to thank the NJBIA for the opportunity. I think the last three speakers have really set the scene for my talk. I'm going to talk about three main things. So if we can get the slides going. The first thing I'll talk about is some perspectives on the drivers for the energy demand and the whole, what we call at ExxonMobil, the dual challenge. I think President Joe articulated that very well already. Then I will talk about some of the energy solutions that are needed, and the previous speaker also articulated some of those, but also say what we are doing at ExxonMobil, and then give you some perspectives what we are doing here in New Jersey, because we have our corporate R&D, long-term corporate R&D headquarters here in Clinton, New Jersey, which I manage, and I will give you some perspectives on that. Okay, so let's talk about developing our energy futures. If you go to the next slide, please. Yeah, we already covered that. Go to the next slide. Let me start by giving some perspectives on drivers for energy demand. And some of these themes you have already, thank you. Yeah, some of these themes you have already heard in the previous three speakers. Yeah. Okay. So the chart on the left, and it's not as visible, but I'll try to explain. The chart on the left is plotting the United Nations Human Development Index versus the energy demand per capita on the x-axis. The circles in the blue are the high and the very high on the UN Development Index. So you see United States almost close to 1,000 there. And the circles in the gray and the red are on the medium or low. The size of the circle is proportional to the population of that country. Just to orient, New Jersey is 200 or 250 on that chart. And what you can see clearly, there is a strong correlation between the UN Development Index and energy demand per capita. Now, what does the UN Development Index measure? It measures standard of living, it measures health of the population, and it measures the skills development. So it makes sense, because as economies develop and prosper, the energy demand is expected to grow. The chart on the right is a chart from Brookings Institution, which is showing the middle class, and it's also a measure of how the economy is developing in a country. And today there are over 3 billion people in middle class, and it's expected in the next decade the number is going to go to over 5 billion. Mainly driven by Asia-Pacific countries in China and India. And I grew up myself in India, and it's amazing to see how much development is occurring every year or year and a half when we go and visit family. But still, to this day, in my hometown, electricity is not guaranteed 24/7, which is taken for granted here in the United States. So that's what the key takeaway from this slide is, really that as economies prosper, and we need to let the world economies prosper, energy demand is expected to grow. Now let's look at the scale of energy. It is huge. So the chart on the left is showing the global energy demand. And I know it's hard to read again on the chart, but let me again give some perspectives. The unit on the y-axis is what we call quadrillion BTUs or quads. So just to give some perspective, 1 BTU of energy is what you get when you burn 1 matchstick. It requires 1,000 BTU of energy to go 1 mile in a car. And this is order of 10 to the 15 higher versus those numbers that I just quoted. So it's huge. Today, world uses about 550 quads of energy in a given year. It's expected to grow almost 25% by 2040, and these are our energy outlook estimates consistent with the IEA as well. And if you look at the GDP growth in the same time frame, it's expected to grow almost 100% versus the energy demand only 25%. And why is that? And I think President Joe or Commissioner Sean already said that's energy efficiency. The answer is energy efficiency. We have been becoming more and more energy efficient over all these years. And actually you can see the bottom part of the left chart is the developed countries, United States. The energy demand in US is expected to continue to decrease as we go forward because of energy efficiency. And where the growth is in Asia Pacific countries like China and India. If you go to the chart on the right, that's where the CO2 emissions are plotted. And the previous speaker showed a similar chart. Today, the CO2 emissions in the globe are to the tune of 35 billion tons, also called gigatons. And what the chart is showing is based on the nationally determined contributions already declared. Now that is continuing to go down as more countries and private institutions come up with their net zero ambitions. But we have to get down from 35 billion tons today to zero by 2050. That is a huge challenge, and that's really what we call the dual challenge. How do we continue to sustain the growth in the energy demand or meeting those needs while reducing emissions for the world? Now, let's talk about solutions. So the chart on the left is taking the same data but plotting it in a different fashion. So on the y-axis, I'm showing the energy intensity, or on the flip side, energy efficiency. So how much of energy is used per unit of GDP? So as you go down the y-axis, you're becoming more and more energy efficient. The chart, the x-axis is showing the CO2 intensity. So how much of carbon dioxide you're generating per unit of energy used. And as you go to the left of the x-axis, you're decarbonizing or generating less CO2 per unit of energy produced. And the circles are showing the actual global data from 1980 to today, and then projections going forward. And as you can see, is we have essentially come down the vertical axis because of improvements in energy efficiency. And then the curve is showing you, as the previous speaker said, where do we need to get to the 2 degrees C rise? So either we go down, continue down the energy efficiency improvements, or we have to start decarbonizing, and both solutions are important, is energy efficiency as well as moving left on the x-axis. And that's really what the key message on this slide is. And previously you heard the IEA put out a net zero report by 2050. Similarly, Princeton University, whom we collaborate with, also put out a net zero just for the US, and the messages are very consistent. The first key message or summary, if you will, is all solutions are needed. There is not a single solution that will meet those net zero ambitions. Clean and renewable electricity is critical. I mean, there is no question about that. We have heard all the speakers talk about that. However, what is also critical is, as we go through these transitions, solutions that are scalable, affordable, and reliable today that can help us move to the left on the decarbonization, like natural gas with CCS, hydrogen, that was mentioned by one of the questions there, biofuels for hard to decarbonize sectors. Those technologies exist today and can make an impact in the near term. So for ExxonMobil, we really have a 4-pronged strategy, if you will, as we go through this energy transition. The first is mitigating emissions in our own operations. And as an oil and gas and fossil fuel company, we really deal with methane as one of the major sources. And we have ambitions and targets to reduce our methane intensity by 2025 by over 50%. And for doing that, I think President Joe said, or Commissioner Sean, is we have to first measure and know where the fugitive emissions are coming from. So a lot of our research is going in understanding and measuring where those emissions are, and then providing solutions to mitigate those emissions. The second pillar is really working with our customers. And as you saw in the previous chart, well, United States and Europe are already on the front end of the curve, but still China and India, coal is the major source of power. And shifting just from coal to natural gas, the emission reduction is 50%, right, at source. And those are some of the solutions you can do today, and that's what we are working towards globally, is shifting from coal to natural gas power and reducing the emissions by 50% at source. The third pillar is policy. We believe that policy should be science-based, it should be technology agnostic, and let the consumer select what technologies are going to meet the solutions or the low emission targets that are laid out. And then the last point is we as a company have invested in R&D. We have been in operations over 100 years, and the site that I manage in Clinton, we have that been in operation since 1985, and a lot of exciting things are going on within our company in collaboration, and I'll make that point later. In 4 key areas, and those are shown at the bottom. The first is energy efficiency. We continue to develop technology to get more efficient in our operations, as I mentioned. Process intensification is a key word that we are working on. Second is carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So natural gas power, there are 75% of New Jersey's energy comes from natural gas today. And there is an easy solution. You can capture that carbon and sequester. We know how to do it. And I know it needs a little bit of scalable solutions, but that's what we are working on, is how can we scale those carbon capture and sequestration solutions so that make natural gas low emissions. The second technology that we are working on is capturing carbon dioxide directly from air. And that is a challenge because the concentration is 400 ppm. You're looking for a needle in a haystack. However, technology is coming along to really make that happen. The third area is biofuels. And biofuels is a key solution for sectors that are hard to decarbonize, specifically heavy-duty transportation, jet fuels, where technology does not exist yet. It's coming along on the battery side, but technology can be furthered via biofuels. And we are working on algae biofuels, which does not compete with food and has the highest productivity of all the biofuels. Technology is being developed for the last 10 years with a collaboration with the company. And then the last pillar is hydrogen. And I completely agree with the previous person that asked the question. Hydrogen is one of the solutions as an energy carrier for, again, hard to decarbonize sectors like heavy-duty transportation, as well as steel and cement, where steel requires a reduction agent and hydrogen can provide that solution as a low emission option. So those are the areas that we are working on. Now let's talk about some of our facilities. So we have 10 sites globally in research and development. And I like this chart because New Jersey is really shown at the center of the world on this chart, and that's where we have our corporate R&D headquarters. So we have over 1,000 scientists and engineers in Clinton, New Jersey, and almost over 300 plus PhD researchers. We have a Nobel Prize winner. He just retired earlier this year, but he contributed to the IPCC report that got the Peace Prize a little while ago. So we take real pride, and as I said, the site has been in operation since 1985. We work with quite a few companies, universities, and even the government for developing some of these technologies. And lastly, I think the point was well made by the previous speakers as well, is collaboration is critical. We cannot do it alone. And I think that's a key point to mention, partnerships and collaboration. And what I'm showing on this slide is really a pipeline of technology development. As you go from discovering a technology to deployment, all the way to commercialization, collaboration is key across the whole pipeline. On the discovery side, we are working with over 80 plus universities globally, and we work with Princeton University and Rowan University in New Jersey. And those collaborations are critical, as I said, in a lot of the technologies that I mentioned. As you move up the pipeline, national labs, one of the key priorities of the Biden administration and the DOE now is actually to scale and demonstrate some of the technologies that are in the early phase. And I think the previous speaker mentioned the IEA net zero report says that 50% of the technologies that are needed to decarbonize by 2050 are still not demonstrated. If you look at the hard to decarbonize sector, that number is 75% or higher. So technologies need to come along and need to be demonstrated, and that's where the collaboration with national labs, government, as well as other venture capitalists become important. As you move even further, small companies, and I know there are quite a few represented in this audience, we are working with a few small companies, Algae Biofuels as an example that I gave. We are working with Fuel Cell Energy on developing fuel cell for both power generation as well as carbon capture at the same time and hydrogen production. So it does all the three at the same time, which is an exciting technology. And direct air capture, another collaboration with Global Thermostat for capturing carbon dioxide directly from air. And then lastly, what we know how to do best is commercialize those solutions at scale. And one of the key examples I give is we know how to operate offshore platforms because we know we have been doing drilling offshore. And for offshore wind, we can bring those capabilities and we can really have that partnership and discussion for offshore wind as an example. So the key message from this slide is we cannot do it alone. We're all in this together, and all solutions and partnership are needed to really solve this global problem. So closing, three key takeaways. First thing is innovation and technology is critical. The dual challenge is there, and we need all solutions to really meet the challenge. We need to continue investing in research and development, and as a company, we are continuing to do so, and I take a lot of pride in managing the organization, looking at that long-term research. And then the third point is really around collaboration and partnership that is critical for progressing all these solutions. So thank you.
And are we on? Am I on? Yes, thank you. We do have time for a few questions. Let me start. We've heard from you, we've heard from Dr. Curry, before that, about the need for technological solutions. And I think it was implicated in one of the questions about hydrogen earlier, that we seem to be, at least in New Jersey and maybe nationally as well, moving on a path of using or relying on existing technologies for our energy future because there's a sense of urgency. We have to act now, we have to do things now. And there's a concern that we may be locking in and locking out the potential solutions or the needed solutions, to really get to where we need to get to, maintaining reliability, maintaining cost, and thriving from an energy perspective. Do you share that concern? And the technologies needed, on what time, I know this is impossible, on what time frame do you see them evolving and being market ready?
No, that's a great question. So I do share that concern, yes. But we need to progress both parts of the solution. Technologies that are ready today to be deployed need to be deployed. Technologies that are near ready, and that's the technologies that I mentioned, like carbon capture and storage as an example. Technology exists today. It is not as efficient, but with some research, you can deploy that technology, say, in the next 5 years. Biofuels, another case in point, technology exists today, but some of this compete with food. That technology maybe is in the 5 to 10 years, but some technology exists. And then future solutions, hydrogen as another example. Technology exists today to produce both blue hydrogen, which is low emissions, as well as green hydrogen. And we need to further that wherever it makes sense. And some technologies like direct air capture is going to take time. It is going to take time. Some technologies like algae biofuels for as third generation biofuels, it is going to take time. And I say take time more than 10 years because there are challenges. There are significant both scientific and engineering challenges that we are working on. So I think it's a two-step solution. Deploy technology that is available today. Again, the three key words I would use is it has to be scalable, affordable, and reliable. And those are the three things that we take it to heart within our company as well as broadly with our partnerships. And all solutions need to be considered.
Questions from the audience?
Prasanna V from Iron Bound Section Newark. You looking at hemp for any research and development at all for alternative materials?
For alternative materials? Yes, we do, and glad that you asked that question. So one of the things that we are looking for is structural materials, structure-based materials, like, for example, replacing cement and steel, and specifically steel, because the steel industry accounts for 10% of the emissions that I mentioned there. And you can provide solutions to first make steel lightweight and then high performance with some of these composite materials. So absolutely, we are looking at that as one of the key areas because you can repurpose some of these products to make better performing as well as lower emission products replacing steel. Yes.
That was actually not a question or an answer that I expected. Alexis?
I have a question about reliability and especially affordability. So affordability is in terms of cost. Did you incorporate the cost of negative externalities? When you compare, try to make an apples to apples comparison of all the different technologies. Can you speak to that a little bit?
And before you do, can we just have your name and company?
My name is Richard Lawton. I'm with the New Jersey Sustainable Business Council.
Okay. So yes, we do look at what we call the carbon abatement costs. Absolutely. And then what is the supplier's curve technologies that can meet that? And that's why I said solutions like carbon capture and storage are on the lower end of the cost solution that can be deployed today. For example, solutions like green hydrogen are still costly, a factor of 2 or 3 times costly versus blue hydrogen, for example. So absolutely, we look at those costs, and that's how we make the decision on what technologies to invest internally in the near term, in the medium term, and what technologies we believe can get those cost reduction, because some of those technologies are too early in the game, and they will have the learning effect that was mentioned. They will have the experience curve effect that was mentioned, and we believe that has a big potential to make an impact. We invest in those long term as well.